Hello, excuse me. Hello, ladies and gentlemen, and everything in between. Welcome back to Old Man Rambles. Now, as usual, I'm late to the topic, but that's because I don't put out these rambling videos every day, like a lot of people who ramble on the internet do. So, as you can see in the chart behind me, there's been some discourse about left-wing political violence versus right-wing political violence. And, like I said, late to the topic, the president accusing and other people accusing the left of being the most violent. And this chart has come up a lot. And I was reading comments on the internet like I shouldn't do. And someone said that this chart doesn't take into account Black Lives Matter, and that there were over 36 deaths connected to the Black Lives Matter movement. And I thought that might be a valid criticism. You know, I try to be someone who doesn't just blindly accept what other people tell me. What does this chart say? Does it take into that account? And I noticed that, like, there's a pretty big bar for the year for 2020 on this chart. Red still outpaces, right-wing violence still outpaces left-wing violence that year, but people are saying that it doesn't, it doesn't accurately depict the violence done by the left during the Black Lives Matter movement. So I decided to examine that a little bit. So this chart is specifically counting deaths. It's not counting any other activity might be associated with the Black Lives Matter movement or other types of political violence. It is only associating this chart with people who are killed due to political violence. Now, is that number correct, of the number of people that were killed and associated with Black Lives Matter? Yes, approximately 42, 43 people have deaths that can be connected with Black Lives Matter. And you would think that if that was the case, what's that chart say for numbers? I think for 2020, that chart only counts a total of approximately 38 deaths. I should have looked at that before I stared at the camera. So you would think this report will be biased then. However, those 40 some odd deaths were not caused by the Black Lives Matter movement. They could be tied to it. I could only find approximately 6 that I could specifically tie to actions that could be tied to the political left. 5 or 6. There were a few that could be tied to the politically right. 6 people were killed by police officers. That's certainly not violence perpetrated by the left. There were some people who were shot in self-defense, not being assaulted by Black Lives Matter. But those deaths wouldn't be even if they were, those deaths wouldn't be caused by the left. There were a couple of people who were, some people who shot looters, so on and so forth. People who were caught in a crossfire by police. These majority of the deaths are simply things that happened. So I think this chart might have undercounted perhaps the deaths from the left and the Black Lives Matter movement, but they're using specific criteria, which I will disagree with at certain points. A good example of that is Luigi Mangione, who shot the insurance CEO earlier this year. They're counting that as left-wing political violence. The only reason they're doing that is because he shot a rich white CEO. They're considering it anti-capitalist. He's not from the left. They're considering it left-wing violence because of who he killed, not because of his political not because of his motivations or who he is. So that's disingenuous. So I think this report could be taken with a grain of salt. I think it deserves some valid criticism. But to further expound on the left being violent, and they primarily use Black Lives Matter as an example of that, and they're counting the non-death related violence. But the people who are accusing the left versus saying the left is more violent are ignoring the death threats given by the right wing to LGBTQ people, people working on the polls during the 2016 election, 2020 election, and 2024 election. People at election locations, at polling locations, received massive amounts of death threats. Those were not coming from the political left. So if you get to count the Black Lives Matter riots as political left-wing violence, then we should also get to count all the death threats that the right perpetrates against anyone who disagrees with them. So there's a lot of disingenuous comments going on here, and talking about this is done solely to imply to point a finger at someone and say you're more violent. All this violence is your fault, without looking at it with any context, as if you could distill violence down to a simple political motivation. That's not to say that some violence isn't politically motivated, but again, it's disingenuous. Not everyone who commits violence does so because of politics. I think Luigi Mangione is a good example of that. That killing was not politically motivated. He was pissed off because he felt his insurance company was screwing him over, and which is true. It's totally true. The insurance company, the insurance company that CEO worked for, denied people wheelchairs. They were continuously hoarding, trying to bolster their profits at the expense of people's welfare. Did I celebrate the death of this CEO? Not particularly, but it has a certain irony to it that I had a bit of schadenfreude. I will admit to. It's like, didn't celebrate it, but yeah, there's a certain amount of, I got a certain chuckle out of it because of the circumstances. Not that the guy necessarily deserved to be killed for it, but it was just an odd thing that happened. But I did want to highlight both the fact that reports like this are based on using certain criteria. That criteria is not ironclad; it has holes in it. So, on the one hand, you could say that this report is not necessarily 100% accurate, but it's also the only report we have. To do something more accurate would require more nuance. And people aren't really going to be willing to do that. And the people pointing political violence are trying to insinuate. They're trying to point fingers. They're trying to find someone to blame, not for accountability, but as punishment. And it really needs to stop. This sort of analysis of left versus right violence didn't even become a thing until certain people started to say that the left was responsible for for more violence, that the left was violent. And it's not important. Violence is violence. Trying to point fingers is just trying to it's trying to divide us. It's trying to create a scapegoat where no one needs to have one. It's not necessary. Please stop. Please stop. Good hunting.